Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller. Robbie Williams is a 24-year veteran with the Hawthorne, California Police Department and is currently a Community Affairs Bureau Commander. His past assignments and roles include Special Victims Investigation Supervisor and Robbery and Homicide Investigation. Prior to his career in law enforcement, Robbie served in the United States Marine Corps and as a mental health social worker at Portals Mental Health Rehabilitation Center in Los Angeles, California. Williams founded the nonprofit organization Coffee with a Cop Incorporated. Coffee with a Cop is one of the largest and fastest growing community policing dialogue programs in America, currently hosted in over 26 countries and spoken in over 5 different languages. Williams has a track record of improving police community engagement and public safety by hosting quarterly community-based educational workshops that focus on sexual assault prevention, victim offender mediation, and property theft prevention.
Welcome to Behind the Crime Scene, where we take you beyond the yellow tape and into the lives of first responders, investigators, and prosecutors who work true crime. I'm Gina Osborne, retired FBI Assistant Special Agent in Charge and former Army Counterintelligence Agent.
And I'm Tracy Miller. I've been a prosecutor for over 23 years. I've tried over 80 jury trials, including some against the most violent predators. Those are including sexual assault, gang crime, and domestic violence. And on today's show, we have Hawthorne Police Lieutenant Robbie Williams. And Gina, Robbie is a friend of mine. I'm so excited that he's on the show today because he really is cutting edge and a leader in community policing.
That is so important, especially right now when there's such a disconnect between law enforcement and the community. I can't wait to hear what Robbie has to say about that.
He started so many community programs, including the international program known as Coffee with a Cop. We got to ask him about how he started that and talk to him about the impact of that program.
Let's go behind the crime scene with Lieutenant Robbie Williams.
It is an honor to have Lieutenant Robbie Williams on the show today. Welcome, Robbie.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Gina and Tracy.
You have such a great background and interesting story. Well, will you tell us a little bit about how you grew up?
I grew up in East Texas, a little small town called Longview. There I was raised by a single mother along with my 2 sisters. And for the most part, we were on the lower spectrum of the social economic status, if you will. We lived in primarily housing projects. During that time, this is the 70s, going into the 80s, there was a lot of drug addiction as well as community violence taking place in my community. So I saw a lot of that firsthand. As early as preschool and growing up in that environment. But one thing that kind of stuck out and kind of shaped my perception of my world is the interaction I had with the police department. At that time, the police department would only come to our community when there was a problem. And oftentimes they would leave with someone from our community. And at that time, they showed very little compassion and they shared very little information. So my perspective was based upon fear of them, as well as a distrust, because we didn't rely upon them during those times. And that kind of led to my ambitions of getting out of Texas and trying to see, another way of, possibly living in another state or something. And here's the Marine Corps. And so I took that opportunity to become a Marine and came out to San Diego, which really opened my eyes because I was so amazed at how beautiful the beach was. And I remember the shiny cars and the beautiful palm trees and the beach itself. And so I said, wow, I want to live here. This is a very different reality than my hometown in Texas. After doing 4 years in the Marine Corps, I got out with an honorable discharge and I decided to make California my home. The Marine Corps made a mistake when they discharged me. They forgot to pay me my last check. So I ended up being homeless for 3 days, living in my car in North Long Beach. And after that, I was able to regain my balance and I was able to find a job. And one of my first jobs was a mental health social worker working in South Central Los Angeles. And this was right after the 1992 riots, which I witnessed firsthand. And I was kind of taken aback because I was like, wow, this is really serious out here. They're burning things and people are upset. But the call for justice was on the mouths of most of the people that were out there doing these types of things. And I kind of sat back and observed, like, wow, they have problems here just like we have in Texas. I wonder what's going to fix that. And it was the same racial inequality, if you will, that people were calling for. And so that kind of motivated me. Even as a mental health social worker, I was witnessing some of those inequalities and some of those unjust moments at the hands of police department personnel that were not there providing the service that I was anticipating receiving, as well as my clients received some of the harsher treatments that I had witnessed in my life. So around this time, I'm taking some classes over at a community college, and I'm learning a little bit about law, and I was able to go on my first ride along with the Long Beach Police Department. And that kind of started shaping, because it was kind of providing me with a different narrative that, oh, wow, police departments are not what I thought they really were. I kind of thought it was this underlying corruption theme where Black and brown people were the constant targets for no reason other than the racial component. And as I started doing more and more with the police department, I became more engaged with the opportunity that I could possibly become a police officer and start trying to shift that narrative towards one of equality. And also I could use that as a platform for modeling behavior to police personnel and as well as the community. So in 1995, I started applying for different jobs in law enforcement, and the Hawthorne Police Department was the first department to hire me. And I was hired subsequently after that offer by some other ones, but I decided to go with Hawthorne because they were the first to offer me the job. And so for the last 25 years, I've been able to witness firsthand things that have really shattered my first impressions or my perspective on law enforcement. And one of those things that kind of shattered was the prevailing narrative that law enforcement is out there just targeting certain people. And I'm not here to discount instances where it's been proven to be true. But by and large, the larger percentage of police interaction with the community is based upon someone calling for help. And police show up and provide this help to complete strangers day by day. So the nature of police department efforts are good. And that's the narrative that was being changed in my mind. And after spending 25 years as a police officer, I now tell that story in order to try to convince young people into just biting off a little bit more on the trust part. You know, despite your bad experiences, despite your distrust, despite your fear, get involved in the process some way any possible way you can. And then that's the way you make change, I believe. And I think for the last 25 years, I've been able to usher in some change at my police department as it relates to how we do business on a day-to-day basis in a city that's predominantly Black and brown.
Is that how you got into community policing?
Kind of, yeah, kind of like that, because as you know, and I kind of break it down of how you began your career for the most part. You start off as a patrol officer. For me, I worked patrol as a patrol officer for 5 years. Then I lateraled to a detective spot where I worked robbery homicide. And I've always been great at talking to the community because the community looked like me. It was just very easy. And so I was very successful at the detective and investigative standpoint. And then when I promoted to sergeant, the chief at the time was wanting to reinvigorate our efforts at community relationships. And I had quite a few community relationships because I was that type of police officer. I spent a lot of time out of my car. It would be very common for you to pass by me. You would see my car and you would see me eating food with a family. You know, it was just that kind of thing.
That's awesome.
But those were relationships that were just very organic to me and very natural. I didn't find it necessary to act out of character. These people, I treated them like this. This is my mother. This is my sister. This is my brother. Yeah, my brother sometimes gets in trouble, but I'm going to treat him with courtesy. And I'm going to treat her with dignity. And that's what allowed a lot of doors to open up for me. So it was almost like a natural fit for me. And it's kind of one of those things you look back on. And I remember having some mentors, and they would ask me the question. They said, Robbie, do you want to promote? And I was like, yeah, I want to promote throughout the ranks. I would love the opportunity to lead this organization in some capacity. And then this was about 10 years ago. They were like, well, you need to get out of community affairs. You need to go complete operational, because community affairs is really probably holding your resume back. And I'm like, wow, but that is such an essential part of what we do. I mean, I've been able to solve some major crimes because of relationships. I've been able to get some things done. I've been able to quash riots in large crowds because someone in the crowd said, nah, that's Officer Williams. He's cool. Let's go about our way. So I didn't want to divorce myself from that value that was so much a part of me. So I kept on pursuing my career and promoting appropriately while working community-oriented policing and developing programs that were really, really needed in a city that still suffers from low socioeconomic stimulant.
There is such a pushback sometimes within our organizations that community policing is not tactical and not the main function of our jobs. How did you combat that within your own organization?
And you're correct. I've often heard that from people who had these theories. But if you look at the root of policing, Sir Robert Peel, the community is the police is the community. Those concepts are not forgotten. So every time you hear of a riot, every time you hear of a protest against the police department, they're not protesting because we're solving crime. We're protesting is because we were negligent on maintaining our relationship as we solve crime. That was always my pushback on those people. And most of the buy-in came in from people who were trying to solve crime through relationships. You cannot solve a crime without a witness or a victim that's willing to cooperate with you. If they don't like you, if they don't trust you, they're not willing to take a risk at testifying or showing up. So that kind of goes hand in hand. And those people who know, those officers that are well seasoned, realize that you can strike a very good balance. And I would even say that you're safer when you have great relationships in the community. And I challenge any officer, have you ever had a citizen crack open that window and kind of peep out there and say, hey, the bad guy you're looking for is behind the shed. Be careful, he has a gun. That's happened to me many a times. That's happened to my colleagues many of times. That's because they don't want anything to happen to you. And it may be because they recognize you from the community and they really want a safe community for themselves. And they know you're the person that's going to do it. They're willing to go out of their way to help you out more than you know.
You talked about creating community policing programs. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those programs?
Some of the programs that I'm very proud of, and the one that is international now, is Coffee with a Cop. Everyone now does Coffee with a Cop. That's a part of every police department or agency's motto at bridging that gap with their community. And it's so big that Australia does a lot of them. South Africa is doing them. I got a call a couple of weeks ago from Yemen, and they wanted instructions on how to set up a Coffee with a Cop. And as you know, Yemen's in the middle of a war. So it goes to show you that human beings still want to have relationships that are full of trust, and they have to be able to defer to one another in order to create this safer community for themselves. So with Coffee with a Cop, we also train that to different police agencies, how to appropriately break down those barriers that Coffee with a Cop has been known for breaking down.
And what is that? Can you explain that?
Yes, I can. So there's some things we do as police personnel that does not jive well with relationships. For instance, transparency. We don't share a lot of information about what we're doing and why are we doing it. Coffee with a Cop gives the opportunity for that citizen to come in over a cup of coffee or over a bagel or what have you and ask that burning question. They can get clarification. I love it when a citizen shows up and says, so tell me about your quotas. How many tickets do you have to write? And then I say, oh my goodness, do you really believe we have quotas? Yes, that's true, isn't it? Well, no, ma'am, that's not true at all. As a matter of fact, in the state of California, any quota system would be illegal. And they're sitting there like, oh my goodness, all my life I thought you guys had quotas. That right there broke down a barrier of distrust because I was being very transparent. And then there's another form in which people would show up and say, hey, you got this one officer, he's kind of rude, he's kind of short. I called him out to my house the other day. I wasn't really happy. I didn't want to write a complaint on him. Could you just tell him to, smile a little bit? Wow, how easy is that? A smile goes a long way. So we talk about those things in the class, and we talk about be aware of your posture. Be aware that in the African American community, the perception of you when you walk up to a car on a traffic stop and your hand is on your gun is what? You see me as a threat. And those things are wholly offensive. And so we talk a little bit more about the history also about, the first American police officers were really slave catchers. And so there's a lot of historical residue that falls well into what we're doing today. And so you have to be mindful of that. And we even talk about implicit bias. We talk about procedural justice, being fair, being just, and being transparent, being impartial. All those things we can practice on a day-to-day basis and really send home the idea that we're here for you all the time.
You have this idea. How did you come up with it? There's an international program now that is so successful. How did you come up with the idea?
So at that time, I had 2 civilian staff members, and every Wednesday, we would sit around and do pretty much like a brainstorming exercise, something you would do in high school. Give me your ideas. What can we do better? How can we get out there? And this lady who's a civilian who's now retired said, why don't we just one day go to Denny's and sit there and talk to people? And she came up with a flyer and she said, let's call it Coffee with a Cop. And the first idea was like, maybe it's Coffee with the Cop, chief of police. Then it was like, well, maybe it's just actual police officers just go there and just talk. I'm listening to it and I bring it to my bosses and my bosses are like, oh, that's Robbie. Okay, let's see what happens. And we tried out, and my friend Chris Cognac, who really, really put some wheels on the vehicle and set it up, and we went to McDonald's. And at the very first one, we sat there waiting for people to talk to us. We sat there, and we're just sitting around like, okay, it's not working. It's not working. No one's talking to us. And Chris, he is such a just outlandish kind of guy. He grabs a pot of coffee and he starts walking around to the tables and coffee. He's just like, hey, we're here just to talk to you. They'll launch the first principle of Coffee with a Cop. You have to get off your butt and go do the work. You have to engage the public because the public has been trained not to talk to you in these restaurants because they think you're too busy. So you have to be
right.
That creates this natural, neutral location where you just show up randomly and offer acts of kindness. Open the door, introduce yourself. Hey, I'm Robbie Williams. I'm here with Coffee with a Cop. What is this about? We just want to have a better relationship with our community. Tell us what's going on. Who's going to shoot that down? Those are the bedrocks of that program. Just basic conversation.
You talked about the quota misunderstanding or people not understanding. What else do you think are some basic myths that people have about law enforcement?
Okay, so I'll start off with my own myth, was that officers had cocaine in their pocket that they can plant on you. They had guns that they can plant on you, and that they would incarcerate you just for the sake of doing that. Some other urban legend type things are, you can't trust them. They'll actually steal money from you. You can't trust them. They will actually lie on you. You can't trust them. They will actually, they're all cheaters on their wives and spouses. They're all batterers of their wives and spouses. So those are some of the rumors that I hear. And I'm able to say, no, that doesn't happen that often. And if it did, that officer would be fired, and that we all are alcoholics. So all things, I'm like, wow.
It sounds like you've done a really good job at really connecting with your community. But when you see what's going on in the world today and the opinions or the misconceptions towards law enforcement right now, how do you fix that? I mean, on a global scale, how do you fix what's going on in America right now?
There's 3 things we have to continuously do well. And there's 3 of them. And I've been saying this around the nation as I talk to many police officers and organizations. The first one is that we have to spend more time out of that car. We have to spend more time in the faces of the citizens that we work for. And that's how you form relationships of trust. Then the second thing that we have to be really good at is holding our problem employees accountable when they cross that line. And even to the point of making it where it's that people can see it so they can understand what those accountability measures are. That when you're talking about giving someone administrative leave with pay, what does that mean? Explain that, which brings me to the third one. We have to start telling people why. We have to do a better job of explaining to people why we're here, because the question is one of legitimacy. And if you're able to explain, ma'am, the reason I pulled you over was because at this intersection over the last 2 weeks, we've had 3 major accidents because people were not paying attention. One person was actually on their cell phone. So the reason I stopped you, ma'am, is because I thought that you were on your cell phone. See, I see your license and registration. I will examine your documentation, then we'll see where we go from there. I just explained to you reason why. I just gave you a legitimate reason why I'm in that area. I'm not out there just looking for opportunity. I'm actually trying to provide a level of safety because something has happened here in the prior couple of weeks and I'm trying to prevent it from happening again. That little skit, if you will, that little statement that I made, those are just a few seconds longer, as opposed to what officers tend to do. Pull you over, license and registration. Well, why'd you stop me for? I'll tell you once you give me your license and registration. Well, I'm not giving you my license and registration until you tell me what you pulled me over for. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Give me your license and registration. Conflict.
Right. What do you say to your colleagues, peers, and even to yourself on the rough days when the actions of a few are blamed on the whole?
Okay, so when the community is blaming the whole organization for things going wrong?
For the acts of a few, yeah.
Okay. Well, I often remind my officers that groupthink is very common, and it's not just common in the regular community, it's very common in law enforcement. So how we work through it is through those relationships. And remember that the majority of people that are living in our community rely upon our services. And how I know that is because when something happens, they are still calling 911. So I often show them a graph of where is the confidence level at as it relates to police and other professions. Police officers still rank fairly higher than politicians, doctors, teachers, and lawyers. So
yeah, everybody ranks higher than a lawyer, Robbie.
I'm sorry, Trey. The point is, the community really does have a high confidence level in us. So it's important for those officers to be professional. Despite what people are saying, despite protests, understand that that's their rights. That's what's so great about this nation. Our nation was founded upon a group of people saying to England, we're not taking this anymore. We're protesting.
That makes sense. You talked about your childhood, and you've come so far, having been born and raised in the projects, and then not trusting law enforcement, and now being a lieutenant, a leader of law enforcement. What would you say to your younger self?
What I would say to my younger self is you know what, Robbie? You didn't have enough information. You didn't have anyone inside of law enforcement that was willing to share with you vital pieces of the puzzle. I was operating with puzzle pieces that were missing. And so that's something I share with kids that I mentor, is that I want them to be critical thinkers. Think beyond what the group is saying. Just call into your own experiences and be willing to go out of your comfort zone to possibly discover a new truth, possibly rewrite a narrative that may not be mainstream, but be a person of conviction and be willing to stand on that and share that information. So I would tell my younger self, Robbie, it's okay. Be more of a critical thinker. You don't have enough information right here. Trust your instinct that human beings are all pretty much the same. Share your story with other people. And that's how you start including more people into making pathways to a safer community.
You were recently featured in People magazine. Congratulations on that. The title of the article was Too Black to be Blue, Too Blue to be Black. Can you describe what your philosophy is with regard to that?
So the feeling I get throughout my 25 years is one of such. Growing up being a Black man, having not being given the benefit of the doubt, meaning I've been in situations throughout my life that people that are not my race would look at me as a threat. And how does that look? You know, that's that lady who holds a purse a little closer if you walk in. That's the security guard that follows you around the store. Those are instances where you're not being given the benefit of the doubt automatically. And the same thing has happened to me as a police officer. At a part of my career, I actually went to Manhattan Beach and I worked there for 2 months. And I had an incident where I showed up at a call where a lady was calling for help. And I knocked on the door and she refused to open the door because she did not recognize me as a police officer. And I have to defer that it was because of my race. So that happens. And why it's a dichotomy is, well, because as a Black man, I'm not given the benefit of the doubt in or out of the uniform customarily. I have to shape how I present myself in order to make other people feel comfortable so that I appear to be less threatening, because I know sometimes people's perception of me is big Black bald head guy. He looks intimidating. Now, as a police officer, when I show up in my community, which is predominantly Black or brown, their trust of me is kind of questionable until I have someone to vet me, someone to co-sign me, because they're seeing the blue before they actually see my race. I've actually had someone say, you pulled me over because I'm Black. And I almost fell on the sidewalk laughing because I've been Black for 50 years already. And I pulled you over because you're Black? What's that figure? So those are just some of the stories that happen. But it's getting beyond that. So I have to get beyond what you see of me, get to know me. Same thing with the badge. See beyond the badge, get to know me. And it's my job to reveal myself to you so that we can have this relationship. And then we can share recipes, if you will. We can share secrets, if you will. But we can work together as allies as opposed to mortal enemies. It doesn't have to be that way. So I see both worlds. I get why people are upset. I get why people are somewhat shocked. I heard a lady the other day say, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Well, in my community, that's always happened. We've always known that. We've always said it. We said it in our music. We said it in our art. We said it in our expressive word. No one was willing to listen to those Black and brown people who have been brutalized by government. And I say government because that's really what the heart of it is. Seeing those acts taken out by someone who's a government employee with a given authority makes it even worse than it is citizen on citizen. And that's what I try to get people to focus on. And it's not to discount the race component, but it's to also illuminate the government citizen component. And neither one is good when it turns out with the results that happened in Minneapolis.
Do you have hope for our future on this issue?
Oh, most definitely. I have full hope for the future. And the reason is, even in those protests, you see that passion in those young people's face. And I know it can be intimidating sometimes. I know it's for me. We just had a protest. We have one tomorrow. But the passion, and they're seeking information. You see, I've heard their protests. I've heard what they're calling for. And some of it, I'm like, they don't have enough information. They're kind of like me. They're like the 7-year-old me all over again. They don't have enough information. And the second part of it is that they don't have anyone willing to sit down with them and share with them the right information. Someone has to do it. And this time is creating a safe space for people to come together, forced to sometimes, but the dialogue will continue with or without. My goal for my organization is to earn our collective seat at the decision-making table. And the only way you're going to do that is through dialogue, because the citizen always has the trigger, has the right, has the vote to vote you away, to demolish you and your programs if they don't trust you and if you're not legitimate. So we have to answer the call to sit at the table and talk about how do we reimagine policing going forward. Yes, we know a lot of information that the citizens don't know. I know that there's task force out there working against human trafficking. Does the average citizen know that? No, they probably don't think about it because human trafficking investigators don't talk about it a lot. I know that there's some real bad people out here waiting for law enforcement to disappear so that they can run havoc on the nation. The average citizen doesn't know that. So it's important for us to share those little nuggets of information, not for the point of a PR, but for the point of transparency. This is what's really important in our community. While you were sleeping at 3 o'clock at night, there were police officers out there guarding your home. Did you know that you were susceptible to a break-in last night? No, it was prevented because a police officer was there that pulled over that car, arrested that guy who had burglar tools and had other people's stolen property. How often does that get out there? Not that often at all.
In light of everything that's happened within the last couple of months and tensions are so high, where do you see us a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now with regard to policing and connecting with the community?
If we play this right, that the police department will once again have a seat at that decision-making table. We will be not necessarily in the leading component of public safety, but it would be more of a collaborative relationship with other social services, nonprofit organizations, Department of Mental Health. And it's going to be more of a collaborative effort that goes out there. And it's going to be citizen advisory aspects included. And it's going to be policies around that. That's what I think the next year or two looks like. And then there's going to be, like I said, a reimagining of what public safety priorities should be.
Robbie, you are so inspiring, and you give me so much hope as I'm sitting here listening to you. Thank you. That perspective is fantastic.
No, you're more than welcome.
Tracy, it is so important right now for law enforcement to fix that disconnect between law enforcement and the community. And listening to Robbie, I definitely have hope that that's going to happen.
I do too. And it's interesting. What I found interesting is when he was talking about starting with Coffee with a Cop. As you know, Gina, I started a community policing program called OC Grit. And there is pushback when you do something different in our fields. We're so traditional. You know, I'm sure the FBI was the same way. But we have a job to do. We stick to our job, and thinking outside the box, sometimes you culturally get pushback from starting new ideas. And I thought the insight he gave and the image of his partner walking around McDonald's with a coffee pot was hilarious.
And it is. I mean, communication is key to conflict resolution. Absolutely. And it's so important that every police officer, everyone in law enforcement, every first responder, everyone has the responsibility to represent their brand, their law enforcement brand of doing the right thing, being there to help, putting bad people in jail. I think it's just so important to communicate that.
And I think it's important also for the community to understand the great work that a majority of law enforcement does in keeping us safe and understand the sacrifices that are made by those who choose that profession.
And that's why we do this show, is so we can humanize law enforcement, so we can introduce people who aren't or maybe not be familiar with law enforcement or with prosecutors, where their hearts are, why they do what they do, and really what haunts them.
Exactly. And when Robbie talked about being a 7-year-old kid needing more information, that's one of the examples of what we're trying to provide when he talked about connection and relationships. And that's what motivates us on the show.
Absolutely.
He inspired me for sure. He definitely, he always has. He's doing a great job leading during these times. Please subscribe to Behind the Crime Scene through your local podcast provider.
And you will also find us on social media. We would love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments about the show.
BehindTheCrimeScene.com is our website. We'll see you next time on Behind the Crime Scene.
Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller is produced and edited by Lisa Osborne. Theme music is Insomnia by retired IRS Special Agent Clarissa Balmaceda. Find us on social media through BehindTheCrimeScene.com. And don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Behind the Crime Scene with Gina Osborne and Tracy Miller wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Osborne.